let me know when you're ready.
Go for it. Want to count me down?
Yep. All right, meeting going live in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. We are live.
All right. Good evening. Welcome to the July 25th, 2024 Rental Housing Committee special meeting. For those joining us in person, please note that due to our hybrid environment, audio and video recordings can no longer be shared from the lectern. Requests to share an audio or video presentation during a Rental Housing Committee meeting should be directed to mvrent@mountainview.gov by 4:30 p.m. on the meeting date. The meeting is called to order at 7:02 p.m. All committee members are present. So let's move on to the consent calendar. These items will be approved by one motion unless any member of the committee wishes to remove an item for discussion. The purpose of the consent calendar is for the committee to efficiently and quickly consider routine or administrative business items with one motion. Public comment will occur after the discussion. We invite you to submit a speaker card now if you would like to speak on this item during public comment. Would any member of the committee like to pull an item? All right. I now invite public comments. In-person public comment will be called to speak first. Is that a touchscreen? Can I get the participants panel, please? Thank you. All right. Seeing no comments. Motion's been made by Robert Cox, seconded by Edie Keating. So, time to vote.
So I move that we accept the consent calendar as written.
All right. Baden seconded. All right. Motion passes unanimously. We will now open the meeting for oral communication from the public. This portion of the meeting is reserved for persons wishing to address the committee on any matter not on the agenda. Speakers are allowed to speak on any topic for up to 3 minutes during this section. State law prohibits the committee from acting on non-agenda items. Would any member of the public like to provide comment on a non-agenda item? If you'd like to speak on this item in person, please submit a speaker card to the staff now. If you're on Zoom, raise your hand. All right. Seeing no speakers, we can move on to item 5, new business. Oh yeah, well, the appeal hearing, which is a new appeal hearing. Okay. We will now move to agenda item 5.1, appeal of hearing officer's decision regarding petition numbers C-2324-0032. This appeal will have Spanish interpretation. Before we get started, we will have the interpreter give an announcement on how to enter the interpretation room.
Buenas noches. Si necesita interpretación al español, pulse el botón Interpretación en Zoom y seleccione el idioma adecuado para escuchar la reunión en ese idioma. Gracias.
Thank you, Jason. The Rental Housing Committee in hearing the appeal is acting in a quasi-judicial fashion and will conduct the hearing in accordance with those standards. Staff will detail the appeal hearing process in their presentation. Before we get started, RHC members are required to disclose any communications that they have had with any of the parties to the petition or the parties' representatives and the substance of those communications since the date the petition was filed. The decision of the RHC is to be based on the record presented to the hearing officer. Information disclosed to an RHC member that is not part of the record is not to be considered in the hearing.
Actos no está considerado. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, I'm not in interpretation mode.
That would make the interpretation difficult.
Yeah. So sorry about that. You're going to have to start over. I'll let you know when I'm in, but I'm not in right now.
I will wait to not hear you.
Sounds good.
Are you in the room, Jason?
I will assume that he said yes or C in the room. All right. So let's start over. The Rental Housing Committee, in hearing the appeal, is acting in a quasi-judicial fashion and will conduct the hearing in accordance with those standards. Staff will detail the appeal hearing process in their presentation. Before we get started, RHC members are required to disclose any communications that they have had with any of the parties to the petition or the parties' representatives and the substance of those communications since the date that the petition was filed. The decision of the RHC is to be based on the record presented to the hearing officer. Information disclosed to an RHC member that is not part of the record is not to be considered in the hearing. Do any RHC members have ex parte communications that need to be disclosed? Seeing none, we will now proceed with the hearing. Are there any members of the public who are not parties to the petition who would like to speak? In-person public comments will be called to speak first. Virtual comments, please raise your hand. All right, seeing none, we can move on to the staff presentation.
Naz, I think.
Naz?
Yes. Sorry, I was taking notes. Just before I get started, can you all hear the fan that I have going in the background at all?
Nope.
Is it interfering? Okay, great. All right, so the purpose of this item is to consider the tentative appeal decision and either accept the tentative appeal decision, modify or remand the tentative appeal decision with instructions to staff citing appropriate evidence in the record. So summary of this staff presentation, we'll discuss the role of, or the Rental Housing Committee's decision process, the schedule for the appeal hearing, and then go over a summary of the petition as well as the appeal. So the Rental Housing Committee's options to hear and decide an appeal include having a closed record, which means deciding based on only the facts in the decision written by the hearing officer, an open record or de novo hearing, in which case you would follow the formal hearing process to potentially accept new facts before making a decision on the appeal, or lastly, a remand, whereby the hearing follows the closed record procedures, but the Rental Housing Committee can identify issues for a hearing officer to re-examine, including potentially accepting new facts. So the Rental Housing Committee must exercise its independent judgment for questions of law, such as statutory interpretation. For questions of fact, the Rental Housing Committee must determine whether or not each appealed element of the hearing officer decision is supported by substantial evidence. This does not mean reweighing the evidence or relitigating the issues. The appeal is based on the record submitted to the hearing officer, so no new evidence is accepted or considered. But this does not mean that the Rental Housing Committee would have to come to the same conclusions as the hearing officer. So the disfavored option in this case would be a de novo hearing. This would require significant time to prepare for the Rental Housing Committee. And in this case, we are actually recommending a remand. The existing evidence is not, staff does not believe that it's sufficient for the Rental Housing Committee to make a decision, but believes that the hearing officer would be better positioned to accept new evidence and make a decision on the outstanding questions in the appeal. So the petition defines the scope of the hearing officer's decision. In this case, as we'll go over, this was a petition for downward adjustment of rent based on unlawful rent. So that was the issue that was examined by the hearing officer at the hearing and decided upon in the hearing officer's decision. And then the appeal of the hearing officer's decision limits the scope of the Rental Housing Committee's review on appeal and we'll go over the singular question that's being raised on appeal here. Go to the next slide. So the schedule for the appeal hearing, the chair has already taken public comment. There were none. So staff will conclude its presentation, followed by the appellant has 10 minutes for their presentation, and then the respondent has 10 minutes, followed by 5 minutes for rebuttal for each party. And then the rental housing committee can ask questions to staff, then to the appellant and respondent. And lastly, the rental housing committee will deliberate and make a decision on the appeal. So, as I mentioned, this was a petition for downward adjustment of rent. The petition sought a downward adjustment on the basis that the landlord had incorrectly calculated the tenant's base rent by failing to include 2 months worth of rent concessions that were provided for in the rental agreement between the parties. Go to the next slide. So a summary of the hearing officer's decision. The hearing officer concluded that the tenant had met a burden of proof, that the landlord had unlawfully demanded and retained rent in excess of the lawful rent for the unit, because the landlord had charged and the tenant had paid a total of $23,500 for the entire initial 12 months of the tenancy, or an average of $1,958.33 per month. And the $23,500 was 10 months of $2,350 in rent, and then 2 months where no rent was charged and rent concessions were provided. And also that the tenant had been invoiced for and paid utility charges in an amount of $900.63 to the landlord over the initial 12-month lease. Based on these factual findings, the hearing officer concluded that the lawful base rent for the rental unit was $2,033.39. So basically the $1,958.33 plus the $75.05 average, that gets you to the $2,033.39 per month. And then lastly, the hearing officer concluded that the landlord owed the tenant a total rent refund based on unlawful rent collected in the amount of $7,596.30 for the 1-year period from November 2022 through October 2023. And the reason for this limitation, the 1-year limitation, is that the regulations adopted by the Rental Housing Committee related to rent concessions limit the liability of landlords to 1 year for any rent concessions that were provided prior to September of 2022, which they were in this case. So the appeal. On appeal, the landlord raises one issue, namely that the hearing officer erred in the calculation of the base rent for the premises because she did not include the utilities charges that the tenant paid directly to Conservice. She only included those that the tenant paid to the landlord. So in support of this, the landlord provides that the total utility payments sent by the tenant to the landlord from November 1st, 2020 through April 30th, 2021 was $900.63. So this was the amount that the hearing officer had used. And in addition to that, there were utility payments amounting $1,193.42 that were paid directly to Conservice from May 1 of 2021 through October 31 of 2021, which was still during the initial term of the tenancy. And so landlord argues that the sum of these amounts should have been used in the base rent calculation rather than just the first amount of the 963 cents. So the tentative appeal decision would remand the hearing officer's decision to gather further evidence regarding utility charges actually paid by tenant, as well as analysis of which utility charges are to be included in the base rent calculation. The reason that the tentative appeal decision recommends a remand is because there are discrepancies between the amounts of utilities charges in the administrative or in the record for the hearing. So there's one amount in the rent ledger, which is that $900.63. There's a different amount that's calculated in the rent roll that was provided by the landlord. And then lastly, there's a different amount when you add up the amounts in the con-service billing statements relating to the initial term of the tenancy. And so it's unclear from the record. It was not addressed at the hearing, why these discrepancies exist, why only certain charges are on the rent ledger, why the landlord only included certain charges on the rent roll. And so the tentative recommends remanding to allow the hearing officer to gather additional information about what was actually paid by the tenant during the initial term of the tenancy and utilities charges. And staff believes that the hearing officer is better positioned to accept new evidence and revise the hearing decision accordingly. And another piece related to that. So the amount of the base rent, this petition was accompanied by a different petition that was all heard at the same hearing by the hearing officer that related to a decrease in housing services as well as habitability issues. And so the outcome of this piece of the decision as to what the correct base rent is will also have an impact on that aspect, since the correct base rent is used to calculate any rent reductions that are provided for the various conditions. And therefore, that's another reason why the hearing officer is better positioned to review new evidence and revise the decision to make sure that they revise that section as well. So fiscal impact, heard this before, but any decision by the Rental Housing Committee on appeal, including adoption or modification of the tentative appeal decision, could potentially lead to litigation, which would have fiscal impacts. One purpose of appealing a hearing decision to the Rental Housing Committee is to ensure that hearing decisions are legally defensible. And so the appeal process to the committee reduces overall risk of legal liability and legal expenses. In this case, the tentative appeal decision recommends remanding the decision. If the Rental Housing Committee were to accept the tentative, additional staff and hearing officer time will be expended on scheduling and holding a second hearing and on revising the decision as necessary. However, this is not anticipated to have an impact on the Rental Housing Committee's budget, which already accounts for staff and hearing officer time related to administration of the petition process. So the recommendation is for the Rental Housing Committee to consider the tentative appeal decision and either accept the tentative appeal decision, modify, or remand the tentative appeal decision with instructions to staff citing appropriate evidence in the record. Thank you.
Thank you very much. All right, it is now time for the appellant landlord or the representative. Please raise your hand so you can be promoted. You can provide your 10 minutes. Andrea? All right. Welcome.
Hello, this is Andrew Van Slyke from the law firm Spencer Fain on behalf of Appellant Speaker Companies and the Arbors at Mountain View. And my timer is starting, so I'm hoping everybody can hear me.
Yep, we can hear you.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. I don't want to take up too much time, so I likely won't need the full 10 minutes. In short, we agree with the tentative decision released. It was a very thorough summary, actually. We only appealed that one section of the order, which is to correctly calculate the base rent. Our appeal was based on our understanding that it didn't fully factor in all of the payments made during that initial term of the tenancy, and agree that the hearing officer would be in the best position to determine the correct amount and revise the base rent amount. We actually have no other comments on that. That was a very thorough summary of the case. The only other request that we have is that or just a request to the rent board that this explanation to ensure that base rent is properly calculated in the future is provided to hearing officers, just to make sure that going forward we have the correct base rent calculations, so we don't wind up appealing the same issue. But otherwise, I have no further comments on this. We ask that the tentative decision be adopted, and if there are any further questions or rebuttals, I'm happy to discuss those. But otherwise, we're in agreement with the decision as it's been issued.
All right. Thank you very much. We're going to move on to the respondent. So, respondent tenant, for your 10 minutes, please raise your hands. You can be promoted to a panelist. And we're going to wait for interpretation.
Rosario, are you in the main room? Or Jason? Can you try one more time to request that the tenant raise their hand?
Oh, I see a raised hand. Rosario?
We can't hear you.
If you're in the interpretation room, we can't hear you. Apologies for trying to work out some technical issues.
Okay, Rosario, I think I took you out of the interpretation room. Can you hear us? No.
It looks like Rosario is still in the English interpretation.
I just switched to Spanish.
Here you are. We can hear you. You're back.
Okay, thank you. Okay, sorry. Yes, I could not find the button. Okay, so I go into Spanish now. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
Are you able to just really quickly ask if the tenant is able to raise their hand? Maybe they're in the main room.
Okay. Okay. ¿Está el inquilino aquí en la sala? ¿Y podría levantar su mano si se encuentra presente? I just did.
Thank you.
And I asked to raise their hand if they're present.
I think at this point, should we assume that the respondent tenant is not present?
Just 1 second. No, they're not here. Yeah, it looks like they're not with us, so I think we can maybe move on.
All right. I think that means we should be able to skip the rebuttal section and we can move on
Yes.
to RHC members. Do you have questions for staff? You either hit the button or
Miembros
just
de
raise your hand.
RSC, ¿tienen alguna pregunta para los miembros del consejo?
1 second, Rosario. Right. Rosario, you can join the Spanish room again. But it doesn't seem like they're here. So.
Okay. Member Keating.
Thank you. So first, I just have a terminology question. So when we're remanding, or in this situation, is it sending back a request to the hearing officer to find new evidence, or are they only interpreting better the evidence that's already there that showed the inconsistency? And I'm just curious, is this like limited de novo or not de novo? So a brief answer would be appreciated. And then I have a second question after.
Yeah, so when you remand, we send an order along with it directing the hearing officer as to the information, the evidence that they are permitted to collect, including new evidence, as well as basically providing them with direction on what they should do on remand. So in this case, it would be taking new evidence. It would essentially be having a second hearing specifically on this one issue, allowing the parties to submit new evidence, to make additional arguments related to this, and then the hearing officer going back and analyzing that new evidence as well as the evidence that was provided at the first hearing related to this issue specifically.
Thank you.
And,
So my second question is that in the tentative appeal, there's language about delay. And when I was looking at the conservience bills, I wasn't seeing a delay. And so I just am curious about, to understand that better about the delay that's mentioned in the tentative appeal.
Yeah, so if you look at the billing dates versus the dates of service for the bills, they're about a month apart. So for instance, like something that's billed in November of 2020 won't be billed until December or January of December 2020 or January of 2021.
So for the bill I'm looking at, it says service period is November. Mm-hmm. And then it says statement date is December 6th. So that's not a lag.
But the payment date, right, is toward the end of that month. It's December 18th, I believe.
Or that one, it says due date a month later after the statement date.
Exactly. So that's when it's paid, right? And so the hearing officer will need to make a decision about what are the amounts that were actually paid by the tenant during the initial term of the tenancy, because that's the language in the regulations.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
All right, Member Cox.
Okay, thank you. So I want to follow up on a comment that the appellant landlord made, that he had requested that when this was all decided, that either the decision made by the hearing officer or the final decision, if it were appealed back to us, would be made available to the other hearing officers so that they could see what was decided in this case. Is that something you can and would follow up on?
All decisions and appeal decisions are made available to all the hearing officers so they can refer back to past decisions to see how things have been decided.
Okay. A follow-up question is, would this decision set any precedent for the other hearing officers, or would it just be information to them and to guide them in making their decisions?
It's more for guidance and best practices.
Okay. And assuming, if it were that this did not come back to us on appeal and the hearing officer's decision was final, would we be able to find out the result of the hearing officer's decision for this case?
Yes, those decisions are public. Mm-hmm. So
Okay.
we can definitely provide you with a copy.
Okay, thank you.
All right, Member Balch.
Yeah, I have one question and a potential follow-up depending on the answer. So the conservice bills for $1,193.42, which appear to be in question in terms of how they were used, was this evidence present for the hearing officer?
Yes, it is in the it is in the record.
Okay, so in other words, there is no new evidence that is being proposed to go back to the hearing officer. It is for the hearing officer to be clear on their reasoning for why apparently that amount was not included in the base rent calculation.
That's part of it. Yes, they can also take new evidence for, I mean, as I mentioned, there's just discrepancies between the various amounts in the different places. And so they can also take new evidence to clarify why those discrepancies exist and what they find to be, more convincing.
Thank you very much.
All right, so seeing no more questions for staff, do we have any questions for the appellant? Nope. All right, the RHC will now deliberate. It would be appropriate at this time to entertain a motion to adopt the tentative decision, after which such motion can be discussed by the RHC. Looks like motion made by Member Cox and seconded by Member Vice Chair Ma. I guess he likes to sign a blank check.
I guess so. That's a little scary.
Very
No,
bold.
I mean, the motion I'm going to make is to accept the tentative appeal decision, recommended one by legal staff in its entirety, and to remand remand it back to the hearing officer to collect additional information so that a more clear decision can be made. Let me say why. Okay. Reason is, first of all, the appellant agrees to it, and the tenant's not here to voice a counter opinion. Secondly, I believe I'm a strong believer in prudence, and I think that if our legal staff feels like not all the facts are in order right now to make a clear and complete and convincing decision, that it just makes sense to send it back. So that's the second thing. I guess I'll just make one other comment, okay, and that's just that I'm a little bit concerned, but it just seems that it may be part of the process, that since, this, whatever decision is made is just informational, that we may not be any clearer on how past utility payments are to be factored into these kind of base rent calculations. And I'm a little bit concerned that, one hearing officer may decide to take it one way and another one may decide to take it another way. And I guess I'd like to just ask staff if there's, if I've got that right, or if there's anything that can be done about it. In particular, I want to say that, as far as the first question went as to how the concession should be treated, I thought that was abundantly clear. I could go over to the city's website. I could even go over to the frequently asked questions, and it was right there about how to treat the concessions. I didn't have to read the CSFRA. But as far as how this goes, I don't think it's not as clear as that. Let me just put it that way. And I would like it to be, if there's some way to get more clarity so that we will likely get more consistent decisions, I think that would be great. I don't know if we would need to do a study session on that, or, there's some other way to do that, but that's my one concern coming away from this. So that's what I got to say. Thank you.
Karen or Naz?
I think go to Naz first.
Naz?
Yeah, I was just going to say that so this is probably not going to continue to be much of an issue because you have put in place the RUBS regulations. And so those will largely take care of this. And your staff is not currently accepting petitions that are related to utility charges that were billed through RUBS. This petition was filed before that. And so it's one of the sort of in that intermediary category where it was allowed to proceed through, because it had already been filed at the time that the RUBS regulations were submitted. So if that makes you feel better, I don't think that this will come up as much in the future, because utilities will be determined through that one-time utility adjustment petition process.
My question back is, then can you say categorically that there won't be cases where this uncertainty will be coming back to us, or you just think it's likely? You're not going to accept any more petitions where the question of how to deal with utilities are going to come forth?
I think it will only come up if a landlord does not file a one-time utility adjustment petition.
Okay.
In the time that they are required to, in which case then the tenant will have the opportunity to file a petition after that process has been completed. So there might be instances where landlords don't comply with the one-time utility adjustment petition process.
Okay. I mean, I have at least, the comfort of knowing that this issue is at least a short-term issue. Thank you.
One second. Just to confirm out loud, Vice Chair Ma, did you want a second? Okay. Motion has been made and seconded. Member Balch.
I just did want to follow up on this last point here. We've had several appeals, I believe, where the facts went back multiple years when an original sin, let's say, of incorrectly calculating rent due to concessions, utilities, finally materialized years later when there was a petition for downward adjustment filed. So it does actually seem to me like to the extent that there is history, that, I mean, the history books don't close until a tenancy concludes, because there's always the potential that a tenancy that's been in effect for 5, 6, 7 years could suddenly be subject to a petition. And then these questions come up of incorrect calculation of rent. I'm just curious, would the staff agree with that, or is there some other limiting factor that I may be overlooking?
So yes, the issues could come up in petitions looking at the past. But I think there's a couple issues going on here. The RUBS regulations are relatively new. The hearing officers have not had to deal with them because we are not in the one-time petition process yet, and that is an administrative process for the most part. So I think as we go through that process, we'll see more consistency and more training.
Member Keating.
Thank you. So I'd like to echo staff's comments that this is a relatively short-term problem with the utilities being separately but yet still part of rent because of our move soon to incorporate the utilities into rent officially. And the other complexity that's fading away but still here is the original rollback provision. And, you know, there are going to be over time fewer and fewer tenancies that were in existence at the rollback time, because that was another complexity that we've heard in a few of these appeals that have come to us. So I look forward to our life, or the situations that we'll be reviewing getting simpler. And I will be supporting the remand of this petition.
Seeing no other comments from the committee, I'll say I also agree with the remand. I think that your logic is sound. I think if the staff thinks it's a good idea to get more information, make a better decision, I'm all for it. So, time to vote. All right. Motion passes
unanimously.
And we can move on to our next item. We are very efficient. Yes. All right. I will try to slow down. You're welcome. We will now move to agenda item 6.1, proposed amendments to Chapter 7, procedures for annual general adjustment of the Community Stabilization and Fair Rent Act regulations, and Chapter 8, procedures for annual general adjustment for mobile home rent stabilization ordinance regulations. Public comment will occur after the presentation item and committee questions. We invite you to submit a speaker card now if you know you would like to speak on this item during public comment. We will begin with a presentation from staff.
All right. I know you missed me. It's been a while. So the purpose of this item is to review and provide feedback on proposed amendments to CSFRA Chapter 7 and MHRSO Chapter 8, procedures for annual general adjustments, clarifying certain aspects of the process for tenant hardship petitions filed to seek relief from banked annual general adjustment increases. So just a little bit of information on your authority. CSFRA Section 1707D provides that the Rental Housing Committee may issue rules and regulations that modify, restrict, or prohibit the ability of landlords to impose accumulated increases upon a finding that the banking of the annual general adjustments causes undue hardship on tenants, provided that landlords retain their right to a fair return. The MHRSO language in sections 46.6 is very similar to that, so I won't kind of repeat it. So some background information. The committee first adopted the CSFRA banked increased tenant hardship regulations on April 13th, 2018. And then once the MHRSO went into effect, the committee adopted the MHRSO regulations, which mirror the CSFRA regulations, on January 24th of 2022. So it's been a few years for each of these. During that time, staff has identified certain areas in the process and procedures for banked increased tenant hardship petitions that need refinement. And additionally, hearing officers have identified aspects of the process and regulations for clarification and simplification. So the goal of the proposed amendments to these regulations is to maximize administrative efficiency, accuracy, and clarity. And one thing I just want to mention that's not on this slide, but you'll see throughout this presentation, as well as the staff report, that we've referred to this as the banked increased tenant hardship petitions, because there is also a tenant hardship petition process where a landlord files an upward adjustment of rent petition. So, once a landlord files an M&OI petition or a petition to get an upward increase in the rent, a tenant can respond with a tenant hardship petition in that case. But the proposed amendments here only relate to the banked increase tenant hardship petition process, not to the upward adjustment of rent tenant hardship petition process. All right, so getting into the recommended changes. So the first one relates to section C1A and C1B of Chapter 7 and of the CSFRA regulations, Chapter 8 of the MHRSO regulations. The first one to C1A would require a tenant to indicate in the petition form whether they can pay any portion of the banked AGA increase, inclusive of the AGA increase for the current year, and if so, the amount of that banked increase that the tenant can pay. The purpose of this recommendation is to achieve a better balance between tenant and landlord needs in this petition process and to ensure a fair rate of return while preserving the administrative nature of the petition process and protecting tenant privacy. And I can get on, I'm happy to take questions later on as it relates to what that means. And then the recommended change to section C1B would add language related to the petition due date. So right now, tenant hardship petitions must be received within 10 calendar days of the effective date of the rent increase. And if they're received more than 10 days after that, then they will be rejected. So this recommendation would add language that the tenant hardship petition that is filed after more than 10 days after the effective date of the rent increase may be accepted if the tenant demonstrates that there was good cause for the delay in filing the hardship petition and that the length of the delay was reasonable given the cause. So there have been instances that staff has seen where a tenant had good cause. For instance, they were in the hospital at the time, or there was some other emergency. They were out of the country for a period of time. And so in those instances, there was previously no authority in the regulations for a hearing officer to consider the good cause and to accept the petition. So this would allow that to, this added language would allow a hearing officer that discretion. All right, so moving on to recommended changes to section C3. So the first is a small but important one, which is that it would increase the process for staff's review of the filing of the petition from 14 days to 30 days. So the reason for this is that, as you've heard in some of our other presentations, there's been an increased volume of filings for all types of petitions, as well as greater complexity of petitions. And this has increased the time for processing petitions. On several occasions, staff has had to issue notices to parties informing them that an extension is required for staff to process the petition because they have not been able to meet the 14-day deadline. And so increasing the time frame for staff review from 14 to 30 days is necessary to ensure that staff can do a thorough job while making sure that they do not run afoul of the deadlines. And then in this section as well, there's a recommended change as it relates to pre-hearing settlement conferences. So previously it provided that these settlement conferences would be encouraged, but staff thinks that it's better to take a more neutral approach. And so it now just says that upon filing of the hardship petition, a tenant petitioner can request a voluntary pre-hearing settlement conference with the landlord. All right, so recommended change to section C4C. So previously there was language in, or right now actually, as the regulation exists, there's language in C6 that provides that if a landlord withdraws a proposed rent increase in response to a tenant hardship petition being filed, then the tenant hardship petition will be deemed withdrawn and a notice of withdrawal will be delivered to the tenant and the landlord. So basically all this does is take that language that's currently in C6 and moves it up to C4C, just to make it a little bit clearer what the outcome of a withdrawal of a proposed bank rent increase would be. So unfortunately for these, the changes to section C5 and C6 were a little bit too large to put into a slide. They are available in the staff report, as well as the attachments, so you can see them there. But just to summarize, this is really probably the biggest change to this process. But currently, the regulations require a hearing to be held, regardless of whether the tenant hardship petition is contested by the landlord or is not. So just to give you a little bit of background, in that time, the division has received 31 hardship petitions, banked increase hardship petitions specifically. Only 5 of those were contested. And in every case where a landlord did not contest, so in those 26 where they did not contest, they also did not appear at the hearing. And all that to say that staff does not believe that recommended changes will interfere with landlord's ability to contest if they need to. So to maximize resources, staff is recommending different processes for contested versus uncontested banked increase tenant hardship petitions. And staff believes that there will be up to 8 hours of staff and hearing officer time saved per case where there's no need for a hearing to be held. So in uncontested petitions, staff is recommending that there be no hearing and that the decision be based on the petition as well as the documentary evidence that's submitted by the tenant. And that once the hearing officer's decision is issued, only the tenant can appeal the hearing officer's decision, since the landlord has chosen not to object or contest the tenant hardship petition. For contested petitions, the process would continue as it's currently written. So there would be a hearing scheduled. The decision would be based on the evidence that's presented by both parties. And once the hearing officer's decision is issued, either party may appeal the hearing officer's decision. All right, and then the last recommended change is to section C7. So this relates to the granting of relief from the banked increases. So the intent when these regulations were adopted was that tenants receive relief from a banked increase if they demonstrated the existence of one of the hardship conditions that's outlined in the regulations. However, the current language in section C7 appears to provide hearing officers with the discretion to deny relief to tenants, even if they demonstrate that a hardship condition exists. The recommended changes that staff has put forth would clarify that the relief must be granted if the tenant has met their burden of demonstrating that a hardship condition applies. It would also provide that the hearing officer will grant relief from the entire banked increase unless the tenant has expressed the ability to pay a portion of the banked increase. So that is going back to one of the first changes or the first recommended change. This is why there's a recommendation to have tenants indicate whether or not they are able to pay any portion of the banked increase, and if so, what portion that is. And then this last change, this I section down here, this is already true. So it's kind of just like declaratory of what already exists, but any portion of the banked increase that's denied by the hearing officer may be imposed in subsequent years. And in that case, the tenant will have to file a new petition, a new tenant hardship petition to request relief from that banked increase. So basically, the tenant proves that they have a hardship condition. In the future, they still have to demonstrate it again. It doesn't just continue on, once it's been decided once. So the recommendation is to review the proposed amendments to CSFRA Regulations Chapter 7 and MHRSO Regulations Chapter 8, clarifying certain aspects of the process for tenant hardship petitions filed to seek relief from banked annual general adjustment increases, to receive public comment, and to provide staff with feedback and direction on next steps for the proposed amendments.
All right, thank you very much. So it's time for questions from the committee. Member Balch?
Yeah, thank you. Going back to C3, I'm curious about the effects of the timing change. Is the increase of the banked AGA considered paused or pending until the petition is resolved?
So that was really up to the individual tenant. Some tenants choose to pay it because the increase, because they're concerned that their landlords will take action to evict them if they don't. Others say, no, I'm not going to pay it until it's determined that I need to pay it. So there's nothing in the rules that requires it to be one way or another. It's really left up to the discretion of the tenant.
Okay, so then in other words, once the landlord issues the rent notice, the rent increase notice, that may be retroactively unwound or have to be refunded if the petition is granted. Is that right?
That's correct.
Okay.
And maybe staff can help me with this, but I do believe that in those instances, if that's happened, usually the hearing officer who looks at the tenant hardship petition in their order will also order the landlord to make a refund if that has been paid.
Thank you. And then one more question on C7. The original language that is now being proposed to be stricken appears to be intentional. So I'm curious if staff knows why the language was the way it is, or is the way it was, and I'm wondering if it was to accommodate that last sentence that regarding the landlord's fair rate of return. I mean, yeah. So do you understand? Is there any reason why that seemingly intentional language was present originally?
Yeah, so what happened, as I mentioned, there's also a tenant hardship petition process for when a landlord files an upward adjustment of rent petition, right? And so in that instance, I think the language was essentially just sort of transferred from one scenario to the other. So in that case, the tenant's hardship condition is considered one factor when determining it, because you have it in the context of all of the evidence that's provided by the landlord with regard to their fair rate of return. Whereas in this instance, it's just, that's all the hearing officer is looking at is the tenant hardship issue. So it was sort of just like taken from that scenario, applied here, and it doesn't exactly fit perfectly.
Right. Yeah, thank you. And then there's my question as a layperson, not an attorney, is that I see then two potentially conflicting statements. In the proposed language, hearing officer shall grant the tenant, so shall grant it, and then a few sentences later, no relief granted if there is a fair rate of return. So those would seem to be in conflict versus the original language saying shall consider, which meaning that maybe it won't be granted if there is a fair rate of return issue. Is there any conflict there?
So I think the final sentence is there if the response from the landlord is to file a fair rate of return petition, we would most likely consolidate those two, but we can't determine fair rate of return without a full petition.
Right, so those are separate processes, actually.
Right.
Okay, thank you. Thank you.
I got you. All right, do you have any? Oh, Member Keating.
So I'd like to just understand a little better the whole process of the back and forth of telling the landlord deciding to use a banked increase and how the tenant is informed about that, and then the tenant, just all the steps that happen.
Yeah.
I can take that, Naz, with the forms that we have.
Yeah, if you want to do it, go for it. I was just going to explain the rent increase piece of it, but if you want to.
If you
probably
rather understand the legal aspects or how we do it in practice.
Process. I think Anki, I think you're going to get me where I want to go.
Okay. So we have a standard form on our website that will help the landlord inform the tenant if he wants to use a banked increase. It gives all the required language, informational language on the form, and it gives them an overview of what type of rent increase he uses and what type and part of the banked increases from previous year he uses. So that's a form that the landlords can use. In that form is also an explanation that the tenant has a right to file a hardship petition. So then we have forms for the tenant to use when they want to file a hardship petition. Usually there is information that they contact us. So if they're interested, they contact us and we help them file a hardship petition.
And so when the banked, the notice of using, the landlord is going to, in the future, 30 days or more notice, right? Going to use a banked rent increase. Is the tenant given the form or referred to that form for the hardship at that time?
So the tenant receives that informational piece from the landlord and the banked increase, and it says they can contact us or file a hardship petition. The form is on the website. So most of the time they contact us and we show them where the hardship petition form is. And then the process starts. We go over the received hardship petition form from the tenant. We have 30 days to see if all the required information is on the petition form. And then we accept that petition form. And then depending on, we tell the landlord they have a petition has been received. We send them all the documents that we receive. Then they can file a response or not. So then we get to the uncontested versus the contested.
So if they file a response, that can be either way. They can tell you it's uncontested, or they can say nothing, or they can contest it?
Yeah.
Thank you. So then if it is contested, then what happens?
Then a hearing, pre-hearing hearing will be set, and a hearing officer decision will be made.
Thank you. Oh.
Go for it.
Thank you. Another question. So we have our software portal, and is it correct that tenants can sign up on that portal? I mean, I guess I'm wondering about how tenants get notified. And I'm wondering if tenants are able to provide rental housing staff with an email or not.
So, notified about the rent increase, or?
In the form that they receive, they can always send an email to mvrent@mountainview.gov.
Right. And we also, because landlords are required to send a copy of their banked rent increase notices to the city, and usually it's done through the portal or through the mail, either way. And we actually send a follow-up packet to tenants saying, the city received a copy of a banked rent increase notice, and then gives them information about hardship petitions there as well. So then they have our information a second time.
The reason I'm asking is I'm thinking of how some people are not timely at looking at their snail mail. And so I'm just wondering if that's the only way that you would be aware of that your rent is going to be increased, and that you have an opportunity to, to file a hardship petition.
that's why we are trying, well, I mean, receiving a rent increase by mail, I think most people know when they receive that rent increase.
So that rent increase is probably taped to the door or put under the door, or?
Usually the landlords do both. They tape it on the door or under the door, and they send it by mail.
So we would assume that would also happen with the banked increase and the form.
The banked increase is an attachment to the regular rent increase form. So it's treated as a regular rent increase form that has to be sent at least 30 days before a rent increase can take effect.
Okay. I'm good for now. Thank you.
Member Rosas.
So I have a question in regard. First of all, did I understand they were trying to change that the initial hearing or the initial when the application is set, then there's a meeting set to try to resolve the issue before it goes to the hearing officer, and now we want to make it a volunteer thing? No? Okay, can you explain that to me, please?
So when a hardship petition has been filed, the tenant has the option to request a settlement conference.
Okay.
But it's not a mandatory part of the whole process. So a settlement conference is like mediation, where a landlord and tenant are being guided by a facilitator to see if they can come to a mutual agreement. If they don't want to have a settlement conference or no result comes out of the settlement conference, it goes into hearing.
Okay, so that was the normal process. Are we trying to change that to be a voluntary to go to mediate? No. Okay. No. Okay, so I misunderstood. Okay, thank you.
Member Cox.
Yeah, so what I'm trying to understand is now, because of the hardship petitions, it's possible that a landlord would want to announce a banked increase for all of his tenants, but he wouldn't necessarily be able to get that from everyone because some people may have hardship conditions, right? So then who's keeping track of which tenants had the hardship petitions and whether or not, the landlord, with respect to each tenant, it can be different as to how much banked increase they can have, right? And so is that just the landlord who knows about that, or does the registration process that we require, involve keeping that information current so that the city knows about it as well?
We know it as well.
Okay, thank you.
Member Balch.
I'm going to make two informational statements if they're helpful. If they're not, you can tell me to be.
Are there questions?
No, they're not questions.
They're not questions for staff?
No, they're not.
Oh,
They respond to some of my colleagues' questions.
Well, I think that has to come after public comment then.
Okay, then I'll hold it till then.
Are there any more questions for staff? I mean, I like creative uses of the process.
Would you agree with this?
Oh, there's a lot of ways to make it work. But if there's no more questions for staff, we can open this up for...
I just wanted to clarify one of committee members Keating's questions. So there is, under state law, rent increase notices have to either be personally delivered or served by mail. So it's a very specific procedure.
An answer from staff. Yeah. Okay. If any members of the public would like to speak, now is the time to raise your hand. All right. Seeing none, we can move on to comments and deliberation. Member Balch.
Yes, thank you so much. It is really unfortunate that the law does not allow electronic notification. It's really frustrating that you must use snail mail or the physical posting. It would be so much easier for both parties if you could also use electronic. But one day, maybe the law will catch up. Second comment is that, the landlord really has a vested interest to keep track of their rent increases. and make it legal and make sure that they know how much they're able to charge and they can charge what they're able to. So yeah, they're going to have a vested interest to keep track of that.
Member Rosas.
So I just want to bring into, as I understand, Commissioner Cox? No. Walsh. Thank you. Walsh. As I understand where you're coming from, but unfortunately some of our community members are speaking, as I'm speaking, I'm giving myself as an example as well, because sometimes, one, we get a whole bunch of emails, and those emails tend to be lost. And when it comes to be your livelihood, when it comes to you're going to be evicted or not, I think that's why I believe the safest way to do it is through the mail, because as soon as you walk into your house, you open your little box, you read your email, right? So I just wanted to bring that into light moving forward, because I certainly do get a lot of emails, and I would like to get a lot less. So,
Just for information, all our forms are in Russian, Chinese, and Spanish as well.
see. There you go. So I just wanted to bring that into light. There was something else, but of course, it just,
No, you got the floor.
I forgot it. I didn't want, you made me say I forgot it.
Hey, we can come back to you if you remember it.
That'll work. It'll come back.
Until then, Vice Chair.
Thank you, Chair. So with regards to feedback, I have no additional feedback to provide. These edits to the process have been taken from experience in the existing process. It's meant to alleviate staff from burdens that are perhaps unnecessary, given, as we saw with the statistics, not a lot of these are uncontested. And it provides clarity to all parties on exactly what is necessary to do the process. Thank you.
Member Cox.
Yes, I just wanted to say that the reason I asked the question that I did is that up until we started giving penalties for registration, registration was actually quite low. And so, this kind of thing where, very important amounts of money are involved, let me say it this way, I'm comforted that registrations have gone up and this kind of thing isn't on the honor system. So even though we all want to be honorable people. Anyway, I just wanted to make a comment too. First of all, I want to thank staff for two things. One is I had sent in a number of questions that they had answered about, particulars with respect to these things, and I got good answers on everything. So thank you for your diligence on that. And also, thank you so much for bringing these amendments forward, because anything that we can do to streamline the process while not taking away the rights of either landlords or tenants is absolutely wonderful. It saves the city money, and maybe it even gets reflected back in lower fees, to everybody. So kudos to you guys.
Thank you. I would also like to thank staff. I think that cleaning up our regulations is something that I love to see. I think that fixing arbitrary timelines and making sure the process is clear, direct. I like refactoring. I think this is great. I wish that we could do it for the MIA code, but yeah. Anyway, so yes, fully agree with Member Cox. Member Keating?
Thank you. I think I'm going back to more questions for staff. So currently, there's this very well-defined list of what would qualify you for hardship. And with the current process, if a landlord contests, I presume that happens, and then what is the basis on which the hearing officer is deciding?
From what we've seen, they decide on the evidence that's being provided.
So, for example, if they said, I believe that the tenant must have more income from that or something, or what?
Usually, that might be an response, but the tenant has to provide, if he relies on the income eligibility requirement, they provide the evidence for that.
And so then if the tenant meets these predefined criteria, the tenant wins. So it's only if the tenant can't prove the hardship that they would lose. Okay. And so then the biggest change that we're making in this process, I believe, is asking the tenant, can you pay some of it? Because that wasn't there before. And are most of the banked increases, you know, the answer to this might be all of them, are being presented along with an AGA?
That is in all the cases.
In all the cases.
You first do the AGA, and then on top of that, they do a banked increase. And the tenant hardship only applies to the banked part of the rent increase. They cannot file a hardship for the AGA.
Okay. So then with the tenant saying, I can pay part of it, then how would a hearing officer make a decision about if the landlord contests? Or on what basis would the landlord contest with this new feature?
I think it's the same as before.
It's the same. It is the same. I mean, the landlord would have to rebut the evidence that the tenant had presented of their eligibility for the hardship.
Yeah, can I add a little bit more context that I think would be helpful? So, as it currently stands, like one of the things that these regulations allow, and I'm not sure if we've seen it, but that they do allow, for instance, is where the landlord would come in and contest, and so the hearing officer would then say, okay, well, rather than granting you relief from the banked AGA entirely, we're going to phase in the banked AGA. So you'll have like a phased in increase or something like that. This would take away essentially that ability for a hearing officer to allow that, because that was never the intent. It was either you do get the relief or you don't get the relief from this. The other thing that it does by asking the tenant how much can you pay, is it is intended to, as I said, protect the tenant's privacy, and to, as it's currently written, you know, a hearing officer could probe into, well, why aren't you using your money this way or that way or whatever it is, right? And it's sort of intended to stop that from happening, to protect the tenant's privacy, because we don't need, you know, a hearing officer to make those kinds of judgments on someone's finances. So
as long as the tenant has provided their documentation of the hardship situation, and they say, I cannot pay more, then that remains like it is now, or mostly is now, but sounds like it's been, you know, a little fuzzy, that they would be granted no banked increase. And this one, you know, I'm sitting here imagining how would the tenant, what's the tenant thought process of saying, yes, I can pay part of it, and perhaps it's to preserve the relationship with the landlord. Although that should be preserved no matter what, but nonetheless, you know, it's hard to, so the tenant should be treated the same whether or not they say they can pay part of it.
They are. And it's also for the tenant to think long-term, because whatever banked increase they now get granted to not pay might come back in later years. So it's also in the best interest of the tenant themselves to make a serious consideration of, because a banked increase also means that in previous year they didn't get the AGA, right? So they have to think about that long term too. Is this a good year where I can pay more or not?
Or can I afford this apartment?
All right, Member Balch.
Yeah, the follow-up question here is really interesting. Two questions. Understanding that there is a privacy issue, but when you were saying that we're trying to discourage or even disallow probing, isn't that what the hearing officer has to do to assess the validity of the claim? I mean, because someone is going to provide their evidence to say, here's my income, here's my expenses, therefore I am unable to afford this banked increase. Isn't there some sort of questioning or analysis that the hearing officer would undertake?
Yeah, definitely an analysis.
Yeah.
Also, the tenant has to provide evidence.
Right.
For instance, this is my income. They have to provide, these are my medical bills that I incurred this year.
Right.
So probing, asking questions on that is okay. What is probably what we try to avoid is, why do you only earn that much money?
Oh, okay.
Wait, you have a degree in this, why
Yeah.
do you only earn that much money? So that goes a step too far, and I don't think that that is in the best interest of the process.
Makes sense, but then how is the language, how does the language define that behavior? Because that is a very difficult behavior to pin down in law. You know what I mean?
What behavior?
Like being argumentative with why aren't you earning more money? That's a very hard.
Yeah, but so we don't want
Obviously,
to go there.
Right, and I think that that's part of the point of these amendments, is to limit those opportunities.
Yeah.
You know, obviously, if it's a contested petition, there may be some of that occurs, but the hearing officer has a few more tools with these amendments to, you know, because there's only a limited number of issues in the hearing. So the hearing officer could say, that's not an appropriate line of inquiry.
And the second question is, there was a comment about disallowing the hearing officer to phase in an increase. The goal is either to allow or disallow. I think I heard that. Isn't partial payment a form of phasing? And so where is the line of demarcation between partial payment and phasing?
I think with phase-in is meant that right now you can't pay the banked part, but maybe in 2 months you can. So instead of paying now the full banked increase, you're going to start paying 20% in 2 months, 40% in 6 months, and 80% in another couple of months. That's what was meant by phasing in. So not the allowance or disallowance of the banked increase.
Okay, so then still the option is it's either no banked increase, a partial increase, or the full increase. Okay, thank you.
Member Rosas.
So remind me how many years the landlord can utilize their bank?
Unlimited.
Oh.
But the
just
bank
cannot exceed
increases
10
don't
months.
carry over from one landlord to another, and they don't carry over from one tenant to another. And there's a limit of 10% per year of rent increases. So that puts some parameters around the banking.
Okay, so yeah, because I thought I had heard that and kind of remember that that's where that was. And I am a little bit concerned if we do not have that limit of how far back you can go to bank, because our goal is to allow the community to stay in Mountain View, right? I mean, that's what the RHC is for. But you're saying that, I don't know, 10% to me might be a little. But yeah, I see. But you're saying
It's in
that
That's in the CSFRA.
Right.
So we don't have the flexibility to change that.
but you can
Only
always
the voters
petition,
can
right?
change that.
Right. And you can always, that's the purpose of the hardship, right?
That's exactly right.
Okay. It's just it's a little difficult, especially for some community members to like. Although I think we're doing a lot better, and the community is definitely becoming more knowledgeable and more astute to where they live and how we have these processes. So I'm feeling a little better. It's just that I was like one of those red flags that I'm like, oh my God, 10% sounds a little harsh, but now I feel a little better. Thank you for the clarification.
Yeah, I feel better knowing that they have our staff to reach out to. Member Cox.
Yeah, I'm just trying to get my head around, the idea of, how much somebody can afford to pay. So let's say he has a certain amount of income, okay? And I can understand that if you have serious medical bills or whatever, it could eat up a lot of that income. But I just wonder whether or not, is there any expectation, like for example, when I was on the EPC, we used to talk about affordable housing means you only pay 30% of your income in your rent. Is there any expectation like that barring unusual circumstances, that a certain amount of someone's income should be available to pay the rent?
That is not built into our regulations or the CSFRA.
Okay. All right, thanks for
And
letting me know.
most people pay more than 30%. Yeah.
All right. Any more comments or deliberation? Anything else to say to staff? Do you think you have enough feedback?
Summarizing, I think in grosso modo, everyone agrees with the proposed changes. So if that's the case, we will bring back the regulations in the next Rental Housing Committee meeting.
All right, excellent. Thank you very much. And now we'll move on to item 7.1, fiscal year 2024-25 Rental Housing Committee meeting schedule. Public comment will occur after the presentation item and committee questions. We'll begin with the presentation from staff.
Yeah, thank you. So up till now, we had a meeting schedule based on the calendar year to bring our work plan and our calendar year in sync with each other and also with what other committees are doing. We're proposing to start using the fiscal year in adopting a meeting schedule and also later on a work plan. As background, the Rental Housing Committee is to hold regular meetings to ensure the performance under the CSFRA and MHRSO in CSFRA section 1709F and MHRSO section 46.9. So also for your information, at your discretion, you can always add additional meeting dates during the year on an as-needed basis. And this is the schedule that was proposed in the memo. We tried as much to hold it on the 4th Thursday of the month. November and December are exemption because of the holidays. And June also is the 3rd Thursday of the month to be in sync with the City Council budget approval, so we are in time for our approval.
So June 19th is a federal holiday?
What?
Yes.
Juneteenth.
Juneteenth.
Jubilee.
Juneteenth.
Shall we do a week earlier then?
I think earlier is safer. Yeah.
Yep.
So June 12th.
And I will let you know right now, I will not be coming for December 12th.
Because it's your birthday.
Do you want to move it on to Krampusnacht?
What?
The 5th of
Oh, that'll be,
December?
yes. We could do it that way. One week before or 1 week after?
Is-
Yeah, 1 week after would be good.
Is December 5th available?
1 week after is only the 19th, I think. Too close? Oh. Oh, that's right. People go on vacation. People fly.
Closer you get to, yep.
Yeah, gotcha. Yeah, I'm just letting you know I'm not coming that day.
And
We also have a help center that day, so have our staff, most of our staff is working at the Housing Help Center that evening.
Okay, so we're doing Juneteenth, the
12th.
12th. And then December, it's going to be, or we haven't decided yet.
That is,
As long as it's not the 12th, I don't care what day in that month.
should we save deliberation on this to after public comment?
Okay.
And is this the end of staff presentation?
Sorry?
Oh, is the staff presentation over for?
Oh, that was the
Oh,
presentation.
yeah, okay, perfect. So, well, committee questions and public comment? Is that a question?
What are we doing about Juneteenth? When are we rescheduling? The 12th, okay, June 12th. And someone had asked about moving the February, which wouldn't work for me. Is that whatever happened with that?
Yes, February and April. But I figured we could do the deliberation about stuff after.
Oh, you could.
If any members of the public would like to speak on this item, please raise your hand now. All right, seeing none, we can move into deliberation.
So can we hear the other requests that we heard about by email?
Yes, I'd request that we move February and April to be a week earlier. So the 20th of February and the 17th of April. But Member Balch?
Yeah, so I'm okay with the April date. The February date, though, is actually during the President's Week school holiday, which is a personal problem for me, but it may be for other people in the community as well due to kid schedules. So I'll just enter that into the record.
Member Cox?
Can I ask for people who want to move the dates why they want to move the dates, or?
Birthdays?
Oh. I came for my 20th anniversary.
Oh my God.
Wait, what?
I'm going to be spending my birthday with you in January.
Chair,
You should bring a cake.
could we go through every date and see if it...
Let's do it. All right, so today, I think we're all good.
Yes.
August 22nd. Any conflicts?
Technically, yes, but I'm not going to make you move it on short notice like that.
Our staff has been very flexible and friendly with us. Let's not push it, right? Okay. September 26th.
I would remind you that is the reason you have an alternate.
Yep. So as long as we have quorum.
When people cannot attend.
Yep.
Thank you.
September meeting?
I'm good.
October? Okay. November? And December?
I'm not coming.
So one?
Huh?
That's quorum.
Okay.
Okay.
So wait, I thought we had decided to move it to...
No, you're good.
Fine. No, it's okay. You're right. This is why we have the alternate. I mean, and it's going to be my birthday, so yes, I want to be off.
It feels targeted somehow. Mm-hmm. And then Mark's birthday. February?
I'm fine.
What?
No problem.
Yeah, but your mic's off, so the public can't hear that.
I am unlikely to have issues with any of these dates.
Okay. Okay, so February. We can keep it, yeah. I'll apologize to Tish and blame you. Yeah. March? Yep. April? Is everyone okay with moving it? No? Is there anything on the third Thursday of April? for the housing center?
The Housing Help Center is first and third Thursdays.
Okay, so the third Thursday is always going to be a problem. Okay. All right, May. And then June we have to change because. Naz?
Sorry, Karen, is this conflict with?
Yeah,
our
but we'll
new-
figure it out.
Okay.
I thought we're keeping every.
I think the decision is not to move any of the dates
Except June 9th.
except for the federal holiday. Yes.
Thank you.
So I
Federal and
just
city
want to
holiday.
point out that if the request to move dates is the second, like for May, would we, the second Thursday, would that be a good option? I'm neutral, but I'm just asking the question.
Because you don't have the Housing Help Center, because you have that on the first and third, I think is why that's being suggested. If we need to move meetings.
Why May?
So no one requested a May change?
No.
Which month was there a request?
April and February. So April would, the second would be the 10th.
It's going to be hard for us to prepare for the next meeting if there's only 2
If they're very
weeks.
close together.
Yeah, it's a very compressed time frame for staff.
Okay. Well, then I think we can all make it work.
So the only meeting we're moving is June, correct?
Yes. Member Balch? You have your hand up. Vice Chair?
Seeing deliberation, I'll make the motion. I make the motion to adopt a resolution of the Rental Housing Committee to modify the meeting schedule from a calendar year basis to a fiscal year basis and set the dates for the RHC meetings for fiscal year 2024-25 as laid out in the packet, with the amendment that the June date will be shifted to June 12th, the second week of that month.
Let's just hope council doesn't decide to meet on that day.
On a Thursday?
Well, remember, that's right. They don't meet on Thursdays. They meet on Mondays. They took that away from us. Tuesdays.
I'm not saying it wouldn't happen. So motion made by Vice Chair, seconded by Member Keating. And the motion passes unanimously. It's uncommon. All right. And we are now going to move on to item 7.2, fiscal year 2024-25 Rental Housing Committee Work Plan. Public comment will occur after the presentation item and committee questions. We will begin with the presentation from staff.
So the purposes of this work plan to provide a full fiscal year's worth of work items for the Rental Housing Committee and for the Rental Housing Committee to review and provide input on the proposed work plan. So historically, again, it was based on a calendar year, and we're trying to here to sync it up and make it for the fiscal year. A work plan includes recurring items, so as appeal hearings as necessary, review of policies and regulations, budget review, and it also outlines a list of tasks, overviews, and issues that the Rental Housing Committee may want to bring forward in the coming months. And due to shifted priorities, some changes to the work plan have been made and added, and we added some items for the second half of the fiscal year. So it's proposed to postpone one item that was in your current work plan, considering master tenant-subtenant relationship to the next fiscal year due to the added items that you can find in the first 6 months of this year. So this is, I hope you can read it. So what we've added is the whole meeting of July the 25th and all the red marked items, which are related to the housing element. In September, you will find a study session on the tenant relocation assistance ordinance efficacy. the Rental Housing Committee also has indicated they want to hold a study session on retaliatory harassment, which you can find in the October meeting. We're also probably going to have a retreat like we did last year, so we can decide on a date for that maybe next month. And then if we go to the second half of the fiscal year, this is all new because the calendar year for 2025 was not discussed yet. As you can see, in January, we added a study session for the MHRSO amendments. This is another housing element item that we want the Rental Housing Committee to review. And all the other items are returning items on a yearly and or monthly or quarterly basis. So that's the presentation. And so we have two questions for the Rental Housing Committee. Do you want to move to a fiscal year basis work plan? And second, please provide us some review and input on the current work plan that is recommended.
All right, thank you. Questions for staff? Member Keating?
Yes. So we have an MNOI. Oh, you have an MNOI hearing coming, but not an appeal, presumably.
No, that's currently not scheduled.
Okay. So if we ever get an MNOI petition or appeal rather that will come to us, I think we'll also need a training session on MNOI. So, but if we don't have, until an appeal comes to us, it could even be in the same meeting almost, but.
Yeah, for sure.
Okay.
And remember, you can always add meetings as well if we feel that that warrants its own separate meeting.
Okay, thank you.
Member Balch?
The retreat in October, what is the typical scheduling for that? Duration, weekday, weekend, night, day?
Last year we did it on a Saturday from 11 to 2, so it included lunch.
Michael's?
Yeah.
Okay.
I invited you.
You did. You did invite me. I had something. I'll have to go back. Yeah. Okay. So weekend, so that'll be easier. Okay. Thank you. And then in general, the input that you ask us for on the work plan, it looks reasonable on first glance. Would this be an opportunity if there was a particular topic we had in mind to suggest? Or is there some other overall feedback that you're looking for from us?
Yeah, for sure. If there's other items that you would like to see appear on the work plan, this is the time to see where that would fit in the schedule.
Okay. Thank you.
Member Cox?
Yeah, one of the things we had talked about before was, this master lease thing. I don't see it here. I mean, are we not doing it? Master leases.
Yeah, so I just mentioned that it was on the schedule before, but because we have to include the housing element items that are more urgent
I see. Okay.
than the subtenant master tent, I suggest we move that to the next fiscal year.
Okay, fair enough. My other question is, do you feel that, the way that this is laid out, then when it comes to just what I would call major items like study sessions and things that don't require, like a timely response, like appeal hearings? I mean, that we can keep it so that, those major items or whatever can fall on regularly scheduled dates. I mean, I guess I'm expressing a preference. I get it that appeal hearings, we have to deal with them in a timely manner, and I'm perfectly, fine with the idea of scheduling them whenever. But I would feel like I would rather it not be that we make a habit of taking things that could be on regular meetings at these extraordinary meetings, just because people make sure that they've cleared their schedule for all the regular meetings. And, I would like it to be that, we make it as easy for people to know ahead of time that they should be in attendance on major items. So just a thought.
Thank you.
For the retaliatory harassment, have we communicated with the city attorney and the city council on potentially doing a joint meeting or other kind of subcommittee?
Yeah, so we have communicated with the city attorney's office, and in the October meeting, we would like to propose some options for the rental housing committee to think about and to move forward with.
So that would be our side starting. We would be starting our side of the discussion in October for that.
Yeah.
Okay. Excellent. Member Rosas.
So I just have a question. Can you elaborate in regards to the retaliatory meeting? What does that mean?
The rental housing committee in the past has expressed interest to see if they want to regulate retaliatory harassment of tenants. And I think the discussion moved forward. And in October, we will discuss the content, and we have more information on the options, how to address it, and also the content of such type of regulation.
Okay, thank you. That now, right, remembered that we definitely discussed that. So yes, thank you for reminding me. It's important.
Seeing no more questions for staff, I would now invite public comment. If you'd like to speak on this item, please click the raise hand button in Zoom or press star 9 on your phone. All right, seeing none, we can go into committee deliberations and feedback. Member Rosas.
No, I'm sorry. I was trying to erase.
Wait.
Thank you.
I got you.
Thank you.
All right, any deliberations or feedback? A motion to approve should include reading the following items.
No, we don't need to approve this. This is just a work plan for the rental housing committee, which also means we can, on a regular basis, look at it and see if we need to make any changes.
Excellent. All right. Vice Chair?
This might just be an extraneous question, but I was wondering, for our current hearing structure, who is exactly allowed in the hearing? Because as mentioned in the CSFRA, there are supposedly registered tenant organizations that can participate in the meeting, but as far as I know, that's never happened. Is that correct?
There are there are public meetings.
Okay, so anyone could show up to a hearing. Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you.
Are they posted anywhere? If the public were to try to,
it's not like a Brown Act meeting where we post an agenda, but they are public meetings.
How would someone find out that they were happening?
I don't know.
Okay. All right. They would ask the staff at mvrent@mountainview.gov. Okay. All right. I think we can now move on to committee staff announcements and updates.
Thank you. All right, so we'll quickly go over the upcoming office hours and workshops. So just to start off, that we are continuing with our weekly online office hours. So we hold those every Tuesday from 10 a.m. to noon, and people can just register at the link on the screen. And for August, we have a few workshops coming up. Some of these are hybrid. If they are hybrid, the link is mountainview.gov/RSP webinars, or you can join in person. So the first workshop coming up in August is August 8th, and that is open to all. So it's not landlord or tenant focused, but it's for everyone. That's at 6:30, and that's going over mobile home rent stabilization. So that's hybrid, online, or at the community room in the community center in the Maple Room. Next is a workshop August 15th at 2 p.m. This is virtual only and landlord focused, and we'll be talking more in detail about utility adjustment petitions for landlords. And then following that up, August 29th, 6:30 p.m. hybrid, virtual, and at the community center in the Maple Room is a tenant-focused workshop talking about the upcoming changes in utility billing. And then we also have our Housing Help Center. So our landlord-focused Housing Help Center continues every first and third Thursday at our office at 298 Escuela, or people can join virtually online. That's from 1 to 3 p.m. We have been seeing quite a big turnout for our landlord Housing Help Centers, and I think the office hours during the work hour has really helped with that, so people don't have to stay after work. But yeah, people are coming in for eviction protections issues, property registration still, and annual fees, a lot of compliance because we did send out our compliance letters a few months ago. And then we have people coming in for petitions and the upcoming utility petition questions as well. And we also have our Housing Help Center specifically for tenants, and these are set for after work hours from 6 to 8 p.m. Again, we are packed at those as well. So those are first and third Thursdays, both hybrid online or at our office at 298 Escuela. And we do have a lot of information about housing programs throughout the city. We provide eviction help. There are legal resources on site for people to get legal advice and other support services about rent assistance, homelessness prevention, food distribution, and things like that. So those are also very popular. Any questions?
Yes? No, comment. It's a comment.
Member Rosas.
It was a comment.
What was the comment?
I just wanted to thank staff for all the wonderful work that they do. The fact that people are coming in to ask questions and means that we are being successful, and I want to thank you guys for that.
It's a good comment.
Yeah. Thank you.
All right. So future agenda items, as we discussed tonight, regulations on tenant hardship updates, and then updates on the utility transition petition process. So look forward to that in a few weeks. All right. The meeting is adjourned at 8:54 p.m. Next Rental Housing Committee meeting is scheduled to be held on Thursday, August 22nd at 7 p.m. Thanks, everybody. Oh, yeah, wait. I forgot the gavel.